Welcome to Stribling's New York. I am your host, Rob Taub, on WOR AM radio and iHeart Media Station 710 on your digital dial, and we're a podcast too, so just go to the WOR website. This is a show about business, culture, and people with a wide range of guests from authors, producers, actors, artists, restaurateurs, famous journalists, as well as people from the world, of course, of real estate who will help you buy, sell, or rent a home or apartment. For over 35 years, Stribling has been one of New York's premier luxury brokerage firms with over 300 real estate professionals, all possessing a unique perspective and skill set, providing the utmost in service and experience. We have a really great show today. As you know, I'm a big fan of the New York Post, and we've had Michael Riedel on recently, and I used to work with Keil Smith, who's another columnist. I'm friends with Phil Mushnick, and in New York City, we don't have, like Beverly Hills does, maps to the stars. So you have to read the New York Post and a special column. Jennifer Gould Keil, who writes the Gimme Shelter column for the New York Post, is joining us today. Welcome, or tonight. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So New York City is changing. We keep on talking about this on every episode of the show in terms of evolving, changing, and the city is just growing so much. We did a whole episode on Brooklyn last week, and so it seems like more and more celebrities are suddenly moving back to New York City from L.A. What are you finding about that pilgrimage?
Well, I think what's interesting, what works about Brooklyn is you can be close to Manhattan, but you can still live in homes. And there are areas of Brooklyn, I go to them now, and I feel like I'm on a movie set. You know, these glistening, beautiful townhouses, completely clean, just looking perfect. And, we had Jennifer Connelly moved there quite early on, Michelle Williams, and a lot of people, they were both pioneers in real estate in Brooklyn, and they also ended up making a lot of money. So Nora Jones now bought, she has a $6.25 million place. Jay Mizell, the photographer, just bought for $15.5 million. You know, these are prices that were really unheard of for Brooklyn 10 years ago.
So does the celebrity purchases also give a justification and a relevance to Brooklyn, do you think?
Well, I think that Brooklyn, was always special and relevant on its own. I mean, one thing that was so wonderful about it was the affordability, and you'd have little pockets like Cobble Hill or Fort Greene where you'd have a lot of artists and creative types that could afford to live there. The problem now is that when people from Hollywood come and you now have finance executives buying in Brooklyn, which they would never do before, along with, trust fund kids buying townhouses, it's going to change the essence, really, of Brooklyn. But it still does have pockets of affordability and a juxtaposition of rich and poor that in some ways seems to be even more extreme than what we can find in Manhattan.
What about, another thing regarding Hollywood and movies and television, since I'm so horribly underemployed, I wear many, many hats. I'm also the weatherman on the Onion News Network, and we tape the show in Queens, but there are a number of studios that have been built in Brooklyn as well. Do we see that happening more and more, and is that going to affect where people in the business live?
Yes, like are you talking about in Queens?
In Queens and Brooklyn, because Boardwalk Empire, when they were shooting, used to double Atlantic City for old neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I know that, and I believe they built a boardwalk there for quite a bit of money.
Yes, no, absolutely, and we're seeing prices that we've never seen before. I have in my column tomorrow, I'm going to be writing about the highest price so far paid in Queens, which is just under $4 million for a first floor unit in a condo building. That was unheard of. All of these places. I mean, in Brooklyn, you also have there was one house, I think the one that Nora Jones bought was used as a film set for Eat, Pray, Love. You know, these are these gorgeous homes, and you see them throughout the boroughs. And now you have all of these great restaurants and culture coming to the outer boroughs as well. And Queens has really exploded as well.
So where should we be looking in Queens? What's going to be the next hot neighborhood?
In Queens, there was something interesting. I had talked to a Chinese developer born in Queens, I think, who is launching a condo, a penthouse. I think a Chinese opera star has bought one unit, but her idea was to have these incredible Asian restaurants that would really be, you know, Queens is already known for having incredible restaurants, but one area where you would have just everything there. You know, you'd have Japanese and Chinese, but really top quality as part of the draw for condo buyers. I think we'll see more, you know, things like that, or along the water where you have beautiful views of the skyline.
Well, you know, you mentioned gastronomically. We recently had David Darcy from NPR on here, and he took me to Queens a couple of months ago, and I don't know if it's somewhere at the borderline between Astoria and Corona, and we went to this neighborhood which had, it seemed like, hundreds of Thai restaurants. I've never seen so many, and I was wowed by the food. It was the best I've ever had, better than in London, and also it was remarkably reasonably priced.
Right, and that's one of the joys of living here.
It had a really hip young crowd. It reminded me of what Manhattan was like when I was younger, whereas it's now just becoming, I mean, it's evolving into a different kind of place, not a bad place, but I see how culturally and economically and gastronomically these places are growing. And I was surprised by Queens because I know about Brooklyn and all the places to eat there, but Queens really wowed me. So what about houses then in Queens? Like Jamaica Estates or places like that, or Bayside? Are those selling yet? Or is that too far?
No, I think that would still be undiscovered, but that it will. You know, there's very few places left to be discovered. Those areas will be coming up. The South Bronx is coming up.
That's what I was that's what I wanted to ask you next, because I'm cheap, so I always take the Willis Avenue Bridge so I don't have to pay the Triborough or the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge fee. And I go down that little ramp past McDonald's. And so I've watched that change over the last 30 years. And now it seems like an almost Soho kind of neighborhood there in the 130s.
Yeah, it's all really amazing. There were areas in the South Bronx. I went to journalism school in the city, and we would, you know, walk past lots filled with burned out cars and rusted things and burned out buildings. And if I knocked on a door to talk to someone or for a story, they would think I was a police officer or a social worker or anything but a journalist. Nobody would talk to people. And, you know, these areas were just, people had given up on them. And to see the changes now, that is something that is positive. You know, the downside always for gentrification is what happens to people who stay and can no longer afford it. You know, we have stories now about people who have lived in Chelsea their whole lives who are taking buses to New Jersey to buy food because just regular food is prohibitively expensive for them in Chelsea. So, you know, there's obviously always good and bad to gentrification.
Do you have a favorite spot or place or new area in Brooklyn or Queens that you recommend to people who are just starting to look now and are going to make their first purchase?
It's a good question. I don't really. You know, I have been spending actually some time. I did visit one area in Queens after dropping my son off for soccer on Randall's Island, and you know, I really am blown away by restaurants and neighborhoods. I am very much a traditionalist as far as neighborhoods go, but I think, you know, for anyone, you need to be by a subway usually, and you know, this idea of hipsters on the L train in Brooklyn, you know, just going out as far as they can, priced out of one neighborhood, moving to the next one. I'd written about Uma Thurman's brother, who was price out of Bed-Stuy. 2 years ago that would have been unheard of. And so the idea is really just follow that train as far as you have to go until you find prices that work.
Did you write about a particular actress that bought like a great house in Brooklyn?
Michelle Williams.
Tell me about that house, because I love that photo of it.
Right. Well, I think they were calling it, someone had dubbed it the, Gone with the Wind house, the Terra house of Brooklyn. And what she likes about it is that it's a big old house that looks like it's in the suburbs, and it comes with a yard and all these things that you don't get in Manhattan. But you're still not far from things. So,
and what's the price point on that house?
I think that was around $6 million.
So you're not going to touch a brownstone really in New York City for something like that, and you get a lot more bang for the buck.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it used to be that only the Upper East Side had the high prices for townhouses, and then we started seeing it on the West Side and Harlem, and now Brooklyn, and it'll keep going. So yeah, the farther removed you are from the center, the cheaper the price, although they're now getting very expensive in Brooklyn. There are people in Brooklyn, artists I know, who call Manhattan Work Island.
Well, that's what it is becoming, yeah.
Right.
And listen, we're running out of time, but I love talking to you, and I hope you'll come on the show regularly because you're filled with information, and we love your column.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.